Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 5th of November 2014, and joining me on this edition, Art Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
I'm merely remarking upon the paradox of asking a masked man who he is.
Games Editor Mark Botwright.
Can you prove any of this?
And Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
Beneath this mask there is an idea, Mr. Creedy, and ideas are bulletproof.
Remember the 5th of November. Gunpowder plot, the whole shebang. Ed, you're a resident history expert when it comes to this kind of thing. Give us the lowdown on what actually happened on the 5th of November.
Well, in many regards it was a little bit anticlimactic. Mr. Guido Fawkes and his merry band of committed Catholics were a little bit upset at just how depressingly Protestant it all was in Parliament. So it's never truly been decided whether he was the ringleader or not, but he was the poor sod caught with many barrels of gunpowder underneath the Houses of Parliament. And let's face it, possession is 9/10 of the law in these circumstances. So effectively, to celebrate not blowing stuff up, we blow stuff up. And if you are of a sort of bored persuasion, you can have a look at the printed example of Fawkes' signature before he went to the Tower of London, and the signature when he signed his confession, and it suggests that they weren't being it wasn't exactly just doing the waterboarding there. I think they were going for something altogether.
There was
a
a
bit more
cheeky bit of
physical.
coercion, I think.
Yeah. Of course, as I say, we find ourselves a couple of hundred years down the pipe, and I think we're right for someone to try again. I mean, I'm aware that GCHQ have now dispatched a van in my general direction for saying that, but essentially the 600 odd arseholes in there don't give a shit about you, and frankly it would be worth reminding them that they work for you and not the other way around. But yeah.
Right, so should we go on with the podcast then?
Topical news there.
Yeah.
So we just get Ed going on the inherent nature of the first past the post system when there's more than two political parties.
No. Just leave it be. I say, remember, I can only consume 600 calories a day. You don't want me to burn off too much energy, or I'll just pass out at the computer.
Oh, that's why you're in a bad mood.
I'm always in a bad mood, but I'm in an especially bad mood on Monday and Wednesdays at the moment.
Find a segue from that.
Mark, tell us about the wonderful prizes we can win.
You can win, and I know all this because I set all this stuff up. Guardians of the Galaxy 3D Blu-ray. We've also got the NVIDIA Shield gaming tablet, which you will all know that Greg Hook reviewed, and obviously he recommended it thoroughly, and the Battlestar Galactica Blu-ray box set.
And how can people win these?
They can join a competition, Phil.
And where is the competition?
It's at avforums.com /competitions. Competitions?
Is that a guess?
No, competitions. Inflection was downwards there.
Good prize, though. Guardians of the Galaxy is a great film. Really enjoyed that at cinema.
Can't believe it's out so quickly.
And
Good prize.
Yeah, and to win it, all you need to do is tell us what score Cars gave the film. So nice and easy. Just
So even if you don't read his review, you've got a 1 in 10 chance of being right anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So it doesn't actually discriminate against the illiterate. That's nice. I like that.
And then you've got the NVIDIA Shield tablet competition, which Mark did mention there, and that Greg did review and give quite a good review. And to win that, all you need to do is tell us what the operating system is on the NVIDIA Shield tablet. Is it Android Jelly Bean, Android Cupcake, Android Kit Kat, or Android Lollipop?
Android and their stupid names for the latest versions of their operating system.
And again, that competition ends on the 17th of November. And finally, now that Mark has the format of what we're actually doing here, you can tell us all about Battlestar Galactica.
How and where there? Let me just type in avforums.com. Right. Yes. No, I'm on the ball. The question is, what score did AVForums reviewer Simon Crust give this TV series? And you've actually given a multiple choice one there. So you've got a 1 in 4 chance.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, or 10.
No, it's 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Oh, right.
Yeah, 1 in 4 chance.
And
or just look up the review and find out what the answer is.
Nah, they'll never catch on.
Yeah, that involves...
Create 4 separate accounts.
Don't tell them.
Cover your bets.
Well, they could do that, but this competition is exclusively open to whom?
Hang on, let me get my glasses. Absorbs. Well, it's hard to wear glasses and headphones at the same time. It's exclusively to members, active members, and well-known members of AVForums.
Okay, so that's the competitions that are available on
Who sold them?
on AVForums right now. Let's kick on and do some podcasting, which is what we're here to do. And it's been another quiet week, if you haven't already guessed. But there is a new music streaming system. They're calling it the future. It's a high-res, lossless music streaming system, service even, and it's called Tidal. Ed, tell us all about it.
Well, you've covered most of the basics, bar the confusion which Tidal themselves have sown, or at least allowed a PR company to sow. Tidal is not high res, as I understand it. High res is greater than CD resolution. Tidal is essentially CD resolution, and that's, to be clear, that's no bad thing. You can get some perfectly impressive results out of 1644, and that is what you get for £20 a month. There are 25 million tracks. I don't quite know how one goes about establishing that. I mean, obviously, that would be quite a playlist to plough through. But effectively, if you have either a browser, but it has to be Chrome at the moment, but obviously that runs on Mac or PC, an iOS device or an Android device, you can access the Tidal streaming service. And anyone who has been using the Spotify app over recent years will find nothing that sets the cat amongst the pigeons or is in any way alarming. It's all entirely familiar. The only difference is that effectively it is the same as either ordering the CD on Amazon or, taking a trip back through time and going to HMV or, however you've procured CDs up until now. I don't want to, spoil too much before I actually try and make a review out of this, but as you might expect, it sounds better than Spotify. And to quantify that, it's a little bit smoother when you're playing it on big and revealing loudspeakers. There's just a slight, a useful sense of there being more information presence. There's just a more natural performance. Things like cymbals, high voices, and so on and so forth simply sound a little less ragged. And there's a lot to like. The more interesting bit, which I'll save for the actual copy, is what happens when you compare an album on Tidal to something which you've lovingly ripped yourself from CD using bespoke software. That's a more interesting one, and that's really where you have to judge up Tidal's argument that you need never buy a CD again. So I hope my son and all sorts of other exciting things permitting to actually get that one done reasonably quickly, which means not probably first half of the month rather than the last couple of days. So watch this space, see how we get on, and obviously please feel free to try it yourself. As well as it being a £20 a month subscription, I believe there are certain ways and means of organising a quick trial to see what you think. And just approach it with an open mind. See how you go, and sorry, I've completely sort of turned into a football pundit. It's essentially, as I say, if you've been using Spotify, you won't find anything alarming or particularly different. So what have you got to lose other than the potentially about £8 a month?
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, don't forget, for new members, Spotify Premium, if it's on both mobile device and desktop devices, up to £12 or so now anyway. So the gap is closing. So yeah, see what you think.
£20 a month, I'm out.
Well, the nature of it's always going to be more specialised, isn't it? Which is going to, and also in terms of royalties, Spotify is able to argue with a compressed service, as are some of the other compressed services, that you get limited royalties from that, but a percentage of people will pop out and then actually buy a physical copy with the attendant royalties that go with that. Tidal can't really argue that. If you're happy enough with how it sounds on Tidal, it's there is, for most people there wouldn't be enough of a jump to buy it on physical media. So realistically, they are going to have to pay artists more, and that is going to cost more.
I was just going to say, is there any kind of potential ramification there where, say, artists might take the music from Spotify and kind of put it only on that one service if they were potentially going to make more from that?
It's been interesting. I've been looking for an example of that being the case. At the moment, I know it's the case that Spotify has certain things that Tidal doesn't. But I could see that being potentially an argument. But what I don't know at the moment is whether Tidal is actually paying out I mean, I don't think they can be paying any worse than Spotify. I need to make that abundantly clear. I mean, there was one instance where Lady Gaga managed to get, I think, $19 for 4 million plays of a song. So Spotify is not the path to wealth. So it will be interesting to see. But the business model has to be different, because Tidal can't promise that anyone other than lunatics like me, who then might go out and buy it on vinyl, you're going to see much in the way of physical sales, because you are offering them the finished article.
I've got to say, how did Tidal justify charging $19.99 US in the States and 19.99 quid here, when by my reckoning and the current exchange rate, it's about equivalent to £12.50? I mean, there's no physical, it's not like they can claim their shipping disc. They've got to make something, or the exchange rate risks. I mean, it's a virtual service, so
it's just the magic dollar-pound parity that happens under these circumstances. I do, to an extent, agree. I suspect, given that they are, it's a Scandinavian organisation, and actually the Scandinavians are not traditionally the worst offenders in this regard. I suspect that there may be some pointless level of bureaucracy that is affecting this final decision somewhere. Alternatively, we may be that we're just on parity pricing with Europe, and an altogether more aggressive policy is being adopted for North America. But that's just me guessing, which I'm good at.
It does seem strange that certain kind of online services do follow the pound to dollar ratio, whereas you would assume a certain amount of, they're not dealing with the kind of logistics of shipping boxes and the like, in the same way that, say a video games console can release in 2 different regions, and we will usually get something at least knocked off. It won't be the same as just pound to dollars, whereas things like downloadable content always seems to kind of follow pretty much the same rule, which is just change pounds to dollars.
It might be slightly to do with taxation too. I mean, I guess our price includes VAT, which is 20%. The US number may not include when they have sales taxes. I don't know if that applies to.
Yeah, but don't these huge companies just no bother paying tax in the UK?
Yep.
Well, Tidal won't, on account of the fact that being based. I mean, and I don't think they'll be saving any money because they're based in Sweden, and I don't believe that they're particularly bargain on corporation tax, if I'm honest. So I don't know if that's necessarily too much. I mean, don't get me wrong. Companies do get it the other way around, get it wrong as well. Didn't Apple charge something stupid, and it worked out that tracks cost 1/10 of a penny or something particularly stupid, and that they lost sort of $2 million in sales before they actually remembered that the yen is quite a high number of them to the dollar.
Well, they gave away a U2 album and people still didn't want it, so there you go. You can't
and they've angered Pink Floyd, who have just further accused U2 of devaluing music. I mean, to be honest, the act of them releasing an album devalues music, but,
So am I the only one that thinks 20 quid on your bike?
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't be bothering with it, no, but...
I don't know, you see. I have been playing about with it for a while. Obviously, my perception at the moment, because I've been given a free trial account, is, positive. But nonetheless, having rigged up with some complexity a means of listening to the files exactly as they would otherwise be on my main streamer, do you know what? There's a lot of times where I'd be looking at buying the lossless download of certain albums, and for as long as I got Tidal, I wouldn't bother. And if I'm spending more than 20 quid a month, which more often than not I am, then yeah. But it comes down to the fact that we've had this conversation before. As a group of people, Steve is the only one of us that still buys Blu-rays, and I think the only one of us that actually buys music.
I still buy CDs.
I buy the odd CD.
Well, there you go. You need to start working out how much you're spending and whether actually £20 a month is a saving. And I know that the argument is that at the moment that you stop paying, you don't have access to it. But As I say, I was working out. I've been paying for Spotify since August 2009. So,
So you're the person that's been keeping it going then.
Well, yeah, but I may be switching. So we'll see how we go.
Right, Ed. So I used to listen on vinyl many, many, many moons ago. I got rid of my turntables a long time ago and all the rest, but I quite fancy getting back into it. So how do I go about it? How do I go about getting back into listening to vinyl from scratch?
Right. The first thing you do is, obviously this doesn't apply to you, Phil, because you're always sober, balanced, reasonable, and focused entirely on the job in hand. You need to work out, is this something I just want to dabble in? Or do I want a piece of equipment commensurate with how else I've been listening to music up until this point? Because it's more expensive to buy something cheap, realise that actually that's not for you and you want to travel further up the food chain after about 6 weeks. So you have to sell the original stuff at a loss and then buy more items. So sit down, work out how much are you prepared to spend. Is this something you just simply want to experiment with, play about with, or whether you want to make a serious go of it? Having done so, if you are looking at spending less than £500, realistically don't buy new. Go and have a look at the plague on all of our houses that is eBay. Believe it or not, Gumtree can be surprisingly good for these sort of things. Have a look at buying a sensible used record player from stalwart organisations like Riga. Project obviously has been now selling for 15 years. Have a look at something which, is normally being sold because someone's got the upgrade bug and they're buying themselves a bigger turntable. So you're buying something which is going to be well looked after. And you can do that from £100. I wouldn't try and do it for less than that unless you are a little bit handy at making sure that you can fix bits that have gone wrong. And then essentially you've then got to start looking at media. The big thing is that you have to budget for, unless you are going to get given a relative's clutch of records or you've never got rid of your old ones, you have to budget from the start for media. It's not like anything else you own is going to play on this. So you can have a look in charity shops, but they these days have been mined pretty much dry. My recommendation would be to have a look at websites like Discogs, which is an online marketplace for vinyl. It is a global marketplace. It uses PayPal like eBay, but there are other means of paying as well. The most cost-effective vinyl is material that was released before CD came along. So the only real way of buying it was vinyl or cassette. So that means there'll be more examples of it. Generally speaking, it won't cost a lot of money. You can get a perfectly nice example of Michael Jackson's Thriller for £6 or so on and so forth. And then really start sort of tinkering from there. And if you're a sane and sensible human being, you go, well, this is quite fun, and occasionally buy sensible albums that were released before CD came along on it. If you're a mentalist like me, you'll then just spend a fortune.
Can I ask what your kind of shelving is like? Because it's the one thing that's always put me off vinyl, which is it seems like everyone I've ever known who's been into vinyl has like a wall which seems like a wall of insulation in their house, which is made of like industrial shelving.
Well, I use IKEA. I can't remember the name, but it begins with a K. They're little, each individual square subsection, so they can be built up in different shapes. It's worth bearing in mind that vinyl is a large frontal area, but they're actually, as they're very thin. When you see someone with a wall of them, that's a lot of records
and a lot of weight.
Yeah, it is quite heavy, but the IKEA stuff is up to it. The other thing is, if you're arty about this, there's the picture frame stowage for articles for albums that you really like, so that keeps the album cover on display. And as I say, if you're starting out, really, I think £40 worth of IKEA box stowage thing. I'll when this goes live, I'll have dug out the link for it. They will work. They will work admirably. I mean, as I say, I've been doing this for quite a while, and I've got half a wall. So I don't get too het up about it. Blu-rays are far more space consuming unless you've binned the packaging.
I wonder how many people have been killed by vinyl.
I don't know. It's quite. I mean, obviously, other than it falling on you, it's quite low voltage, So even when you're messing about with turntables, they very rarely kill you.
I don't know. Well, I'm thinking, killing zombies.
Well, there is that, yeah. But I mean, I don't know. Obviously, things may be different up near the wall where you are, but they're not a big problem down here. I mean, occasionally you see them on Sunday night. The small hours of Sunday morning after a Saturday night. But I believe that if they're left alone with bed rest for a bit, they recover and become normal human beings again.
Right. So very quickly, your 5 steps to becoming a vinyl junkie again are:
consider very carefully how much you want to spend on it. Do some research. By all means, I mean, if there is interest in this, please do let us know in the feedback, and I'd be very happy to put together a more considered guide. But just have a look at what is the going rate, or what is for sale, and the sort of prices that you're looking for. As I say, up to about £500, I would strongly advise you to look used. Turntables are exclusively mechanical. Generally speaking, even if they have gone wrong, they are easy to fix. And then after that, you then need to start looking around for music. And as I say, I'd look online and used initially. The main thing is just don't get suckered into buying stuff because you think it might be rare or it might go up in value. It's about listening. Choose your stuff carefully and just for starting off, enjoy it and try not to go mad. And
one final question: belt drive or direct drive?
Well, now this is something that's been fought with the same sort of vigor as the Middle East conflicts. But generally speaking, for sensibly priced budget decks, belt drive is just going to be a little bit quieter, a little bit more well behaved. If you've got lots of money to throw at the problem. Some of the 70s Japanese direct drives, there's still plenty of parts for them, and they were built to survive the end of the world anyway. If someone offers me a Technics SP10, not to be confused with the 1200s or SL DJ decks, or a Trio L7, or things like that, yeah, they are some of the finest record players ever built. And simply because they're 40 years old doesn't change anything. They're still amazing.
I like the idea that one day maybe there'll be peace in the Middle East and then war will flare up again over vinyl technology. What's that, Netanyahu? You're using a belt drive?
You bastard.
We march tomorrow.
I think it's safe to say I have no interest in vinyl.
I love vinyl. I can totally see the appeal of it, actually. That kind of, that tactile.
I see the appeal. It was a great line that Ed used in his piece about it, the Henry Rollins line about sitting alone in a room with a CD as being lonely, but with an LP, it's enjoying solitude. It's a great line, but the problem is digital technology's ruined my attention span. So the likelihood that digital technology's kind of ruined my attention span. So like being able just to sit down and just listen to an album through, I can't do that.
No,
I genuinely cannot do that. I couldn't sit in a room with no other stimuli other than just music. I'm always doing something else.
I'd love to have an SL1210, an original, fresh out of the box, to sit on a shelf as a piece of art, basically.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Technics is always, for me, it's not so much the beauty of it. They always, just their almost absolute indestructibility is what.
Well, just look at every other turntable other than the esoteric hi-fi stuff that followed. They all copied the Technics layout.
In terms of home audio decks, if you want the bass pattern, you could possibly argue for Lynn's LP12, but Springs are not a sort of universal fit. The bass pattern is Riga, the P2 and P3, and you get ultra minimalist. It's plinth, platter, arm, no lights, switch is normally on the underside of it, literally all as minimalist as you can imagine. That's certainly in the UK that's the sort of home pattern.
Like Laserdisc, it's one of these things where I wish I never sold. And I had thousands and thousands of LPs, 12 inches, some of them really rare stuff like Blue Monday. But for the very reason that I sold thousands of records, I ain't getting back into the hobby. Simple as that.
Well,
I'd just be spending money on stuff that I'd already gotten rid of. And
you should do Laserdisc. I mean, that
No.
would be much more you. And they're dirt cheap these days. It's a far cheaper pastime than vinyl collection.
Yeah,
Like
the thing is,
I said,
though,
I would have
records sound good, but
yeah, well, Laserdisc is
look shit.
long. Yeah, it looks shit.
Yeah, so it's only about the
composite.
cover art and the hilarious machines. I
Yeah,
will give you that.
But I'd still have one in my rack if I could find an original. I think it was the one that you sold, Steve.
yeah, I just sold it to you.
Yeah, if I would have it in the rack. It would never get switched on again or anything like that. But I would still have it in the rack because it was
Which
such
one
a
are you talking
beautiful,
about? What?
I had the CLD 99, so
the
it was
99, the gold one.
Elite. It was the Pioneer Elite, gloss black, wooden edges. It was a gorgeous machine.
Yeah.
Let's face it, wooden side cheeks is where it's at.
Yeah,
it was
totally.
really pretty.
I'd just have that sitting in the rack along with the 1210 that would never get switched on. It'd just be there for a piece of art, basically.
Oh no! Oh dear. Never mind.
And remember, if you need help with any addictions, if anything in this podcast affected you,
You're like the Samaritans, but more judgmental.
right, so that was the Ask the Idiot. Should you get back into vinyl? If you're that way inclined, I'm sure Ed's got plenty more advice for you, so why not ask your questions underneath this podcast in the podcast forum while somebody opens a bit of chocolate. I hope that's getting passed around. Let's move on to upcoming reviews before we finish with hardware. And Steve, what do we have coming up in the next month, because it is the beginning of November?
Yeah, for November, I should be getting, hopefully later this week, Sony's VW300 4K native 4K projector, which is knocking around the £5,000 price point. So this is a real, I can't see a game changer, I think, as far as 4K projection goes. I think that's starting to approach a realistic price for projector fans. That should be coming this week, so I'm excited about that. Also, LG should be sending us in their latest OLED. This is full HD OLED TV, 55-inch curved screen for review. It's basically the latest iteration of the one we reviewed this time last year. And again, I'm looking forward to that because I saw their OLED TVs quite recently at their offices in Slough, and OLED just looks fantastic. So I really want to get my hands on that.
Really
again.
interesting that Samsung came out this week and said no OLED next year.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've been fairly consistent in their view on OLED, haven't they? I mean, they said at the beginning of this year that they thought it'd be another 2 or 3 years before they'd even be able to get back into the OLED market. So clear that they are not currently investing in OLED.
Yeah, which that whole statement just says that, doesn't it? It just says we're conceding defeat at this moment in time. We won't be taking it on. Which
maybe they're being smart. Maybe they're saying, let's see what happens to LG. LG are taking a bit of a gamble. It might pay off handsomely, of course. But I guess if you don't want to, and also, wasn't it? We were talking about this last week, not on the podcast, but just you and I were talking about Samsung posting some losses, weren't they, on the back of their
the mobile
division.
Yeah.
So clearly, even Samsung, even a giant like Samsung, hasn't got infinite amounts of money, and I'm sure that there's an awful lot of expense going into being put in by LG in terms of research into OLED. So yeah, I guess they don't want to spend the money right now.
The other thing is that LG Display are selling the OLED panels, and Samsung would never be seen dead buying their technology.
Yes,
but
it's the one place they can't go.
Yeah, exactly. But everybody else in the market can. So it's going to be interesting to see how that one pans out. It could be that Samsung are left alone with nothing in the OLED camp. It could be quite interesting this next 12 months. The other thing that's coming up, and this is really interesting because we said we were not going to discuss this subject at all in this podcast, but you're going to do a group test on Atmos receivers, Steve.
Yes, I am. Ed's posted his review of the Yamaha RX A3040 last week. Unfortunately, their software upgrade for Atmos hasn't happened yet, but it will be happening within the next week or two, hopefully. I've got the A2040 in for review, but I've also got the Marantz SR7009 and the Pioneer LX58, both of which are already Atmos capable. And hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I'll also be getting in the Denon X5 which by the time we get it for review will also be upgraded for Aura. So that'll be Atmos and Aura. So, but yeah, I'm doing 3 AVRs right now. I'm up to my eyeballs in AVRs.
How many times are you going to have to watch Transformers: Age of Extinction?
Oh, no.
I'm looking forward to
Well,
that.
Expendables comes out in a week or two. So
Oh, well, that
let's
makes
see.
it all right.
That makes it better, doesn't it? You've probably seen the trailer going around for 7, have you? FF7.
I've briefly had a look at it.
Yeah. Steve?
The trailer for what?
Fast and Furious 7.
Oh yes. Yeah, I was.
Or wasn't it Furious
Cannot
7 now?
Furious 7. Well, it was Furious 6 technically. So this is Furious 7. But yes, it looked awesome. And I'm really, really looking forward to it. Apart from there's a slight twinge of sadness because of Paul Walker's untimely death, but the fact that Kurt Russell's in the film just has made it possibly the greatest film of all time. So what can you say? The Rock versus Jason Statham. I saw photographs of that earlier in the week published on Twitter. I'm jizzing in anticipation, to be perfect.
I have to say, Steve, I did find a T-shirt. I can't.
I thought you were about to say I found a tissue.
I found a T-shirt which just has. I will have to find it for you for Christmas. I think it simply says on the front, "You are my Rock, my Dwayne, my Johnson."
Oh, come on. You're telling me you don't want to see The Rock versus Jason Statham? Because I definitely do.
I can't see, and literally, speaking objectively, and I know realism hasn't been a strong part of the franchise up until now,
No.
but unless Statham is armed and The Rock is not, I mean, Dwayne Johnson at the moment, he is the size of some small cars. There is no circumstances under which Jason Statham would not be sort of torn limb from limb.
Yeah. But, anyway, I'm looking forward to it. It did look great. I must admit, the trailer did look great. Hopefully they found a way of working around Paul Walker's death, and keeping the film coherent and not being too obvious.
Yeah, because coherence has been a big part of the franchise up until now.
You don't want to end up like Gladiator, where it was so obviously not Oliver Reed.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, it's not ideal.
I'm assuming technology's moved on a bit since then, but even so, using his brothers and this sort of stuff to get around his absence in some of the scenes is a bit worrying. But
I don't think if something's going to ruin the film, I don't think it will be that.
There's not going to be the death of one of the lead actors then.
No, I take it you're not quite so excited, Phil.
About what?
Fast Furious 7.
Furious 7.
No. I'm trying to get the enthusiasm up to go and see Interstellar on Friday.
I'm really looking forward to Interstellar. I mean, obviously, people who listen to this podcast, Kaz's review went up at the weekend. He was lucky enough to see an advanced screening last Thursday. He loves it. Everything I've read some differing opinions, but I think it was The Guardian who described it. Armageddon was a fun space movie. This is more like watching a science report. But I'm 2001 is one of my favourite films. Apollo 13. I love a bit of realistic space action. It's got the reconnaissance in it. So what more could you want? I'm really looking forward to it, and all I can say is try and see it on the biggest screen possible.
Do you consider 2001 a realistic space film then?
Yeah, certainly its portrayal of
with the technology as perceived at the time. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's a superb space movie. You watch this. I mean, it's the only film I'm aware of, apart from Gravity, where there's no sound in space, which is obviously realistic. Not necessarily interesting, but realistic.
Well, the fact that it's got me considering going to the cinema is a step up, Steve.
You've got an IMAX screen near you.
And I've got an IMAX just 15,
definitely go and see it in IMAX.
15 minutes away. The only thing putting me off at the minute is the cost of going to see it.
How much is a ticket to go and see it?
I think
it's not the cost of the ticket, it's that Phil's car does 6 miles to the tank when he drives on the way there. It's two full tanks of fuel just to get there and back.
Probably. It's about 14 quid a ticket to go in.
Before the cinema last night, when I was watching Nightcrawler, it had a trailer for IMAX coming to Cheltenham. So why are you telling us that? We're in Swindon. That's really
you might want to travel.
In Cheltenham, just see an IMAX screen.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I do have these facilities close by, Steve, but at the same time, it's not cheap, to go and see stuff like that, and me being Scottish and all the rest of it,
Well, you claim to be Scottish, but you were born in England.
Oh,
one of us.
The plot thickens.
Right, I think it's time for games news now.
Defence segue. I like that.
Cue the 10-second silence as Mark turns his microphone on and works out what the hell he was going to say.
I'll play an ident now. Right, ident out of the way. Right, Mark, what have you come up with for games news?
Said with enthusiasm. Satoru Iwata, Nintendo president, had a Q&A with investors. It was translated by someone at NeoGAF. And basically, it was a non-committal answer about region locking, but it has people quite... Well, mildly excited simply because it at least raises the prospect that Nintendo might look at a region-free console at some point in the future. You know, it might be seen as a non-answer, but it's not a no. So, you know, that's, in Nintendo speak, that's a positive. But the fact that it was even, should we say, something that he would speak about in any kind of length at least shows that it's on the table, so to speak. You know, he mentioned problems with long localization periods, and you know, traditionally Nintendo haven't been great with localizations. Kind of, you know, you can go all the way back to the kind of PAL NTSC problems, and various games that just have never shipped to other markets that the people have been really wanting to play, and you know, half the battle in games is getting people interested in your product. And Nintendo, a lot of the time, have had things on consoles that have just never shipped. So yeah, he spoke about different regions and possible issues with specific licensed content. So, you know, if it's something in one region, then you can't necessarily just easily make a localized version. But he did say that region locking was more, it existed more for sellers than for consumers, which shows a kind of softening on the issue.
On semi-Nintendo related news, it popped up on my Twitter feed earlier. Have you seen this bug in Super Smash Bros. Or Brothers, or however it's supposed to be pronounced, where certain behaviour, for reasons not fully understood, is getting people bans of 136 years? Which, yeah, seems kind of harsh to me.
It's harsh, you know, but then again, this is Nintendo. This, at least, should we say, back on region locking, it's a sign that, should we say, they might be looking to modernise. I mean, there have been lots of criticism about not tying content to consoles. You know, people want a single account so that they can move between hardware if they want, you know, to upgrade or change if something breaks, and not have to kind of go to Nintendo to plead to get different content just transferred to a new console. But I mean, Nintendo were always a company that didn't have region locks. The original Game Boy didn't. They brought it in with the DSi, and then for some titles, then properly with the 3DS. But it's perhaps a sign that they're looking to modernize, or that, should we say, they're desperate enough to say, you know, kind of open the floodgates and sell to all regions. Because, you know, thus far there have been precious few titles that you can really see are going to make such a huge problem for publishers and the like with regards importation. You had with certain things reverse importation, so people in Japan actually waiting for a game to come out in the States to import. And so there was a region lock put on a particular PS3 game for that. But generally, it's seen as something that's quite antiquated. So if Nintendo are starting to thaw a little on the subject and are willing to look to modernise, then perhaps it's good news for consumers. It would be good news for Nintendo, because Nintendo's market has kind of shrunk significantly. You know, people have kind of migrated away, you know, to use, you're playing a Nintendo as a kind of synonym just for a video games console. That's died. You know, PlayStation has kind of replaced that in the kind of common vocabulary. But there's still a huge market there for Nintendo fans. It's just the fact that they're spread out across the globe. So they're third in kind of so many different regions, and they're kind of, you know, fighting for second place, and they're never the kind of dominant force they once were. But if you consider the type of games that they actually make, you could argue that they're perhaps the only console manufacturer making their own games that are actually global games. You know, the thing that appeals to someone in Japan is the thing that appeals to someone in America, and it appeals to someone in Europe. Whereas, you know, in the West, we've got particular genres that just do nothing in Japan, and in Japan they've got various kind of genres that, you know, we would never want to see. You know, kind of dating sims and the like just have no audience really in the West. So, you know, they are pretty universal. You know, a Mario title is still big, this kind of stuff, but they take time to get out certain localizations. They just kind of drag their heels with modernizing, and it's just left a lot of fans slightly, you know, pulling their hair out. They're not fully sure whether to commit to another Nintendo console. So if they did release something again, and the fact that this is even on the table surely says that they're already considering what the next console is. I mean, once you've shipped one, you're already thinking about what goes into the next one. So if this is something that they are kind of kicking around, then yeah, it's good news. Good news all round. Yay, Nintendo. That's my little pep rally.
Right, is that the games news?
Yeah, I think that is.
Right, Steve, what's at the cinema?
Nightcrawler, which was a movie written and directed by Dan Gilroy, who actually wrote the film Free Jack. Anyone remembers that from a few years ago? But it's a bit of a family affair, actually, because his brother, Tony Gilroy, best known for doing a lot of the Bourne movies, writing the Bourne movies, is a producer on it. His twin brother, John Gilroy, is the editor. And his wife, Renee Russo, is in the film as well. But the film is dominated by Jake Gyllenhaal, who gives an absolutely stunning performance as the lead character, Lewis Bloom, who's essentially a kind of amoral, sociopathic self-starter who discovers that news channels will pay good money for footage of accidents and murders and this sort of stuff, and starts going around LA at night with a camera, basically getting footage to sell. And the film is both a character study of this character who's repulsive and yet at the same time fascinating and brilliantly played by Gyllenhaal, who's just mesmerizing in a creepy way throughout the entire film. But at the same time, it's also a searing indictment on modern news media, in their desperate attempt to try and win ratings through showing more and more graphic and unpleasant footage, and also the way that it's slightly racist in its approach. If it's a black youth murdered, no one cares, but if it's a white family murdered in their house, something that's the leading story, and it's not just a character study and an indictment of modern media, but also it's also blackly funny in places and quite exciting. There's actually some very exciting scenes in it too. I wouldn't exactly call it a thriller, but there is quite a lot of excitement in it. The film basically sort of follows Gyllenhaal as he both creates a career for himself and a name for himself working with this particular news channel, and specifically with Renee Russo, whose character is the head of the news department in this channel, and in turn has her relationship with him, which I think becomes a bit of a Faustian pat, really, as she begins to realise that she's got more than she bargained for with this guy. He brings in an assistant to help him, who is Riz Ahmed, who played one of the lead guys in Four Lions. He's an English actor, actually, but he doesn't actually spot on American accent. He's very good in it as well, kind of playing a very sympathetic character who's, to a certain extent, the audience's view of what's going on. Almost the entire film takes place at night. It's beautifully shot, actually, got to say, very well done. Nighttime photography. The whole film's got that kind of sodium-like glow to it that makes you feel slightly sick, and it kind of perfectly ties in with Lewis Bloom's world, where he's up all day researching on the internet, and he's very wired, and I think Gyllenhaal lost about 20 pounds something for the part, so he's got this stringy, wired, very gaunt look to him, but he's up all night getting this footage, and they capture the sort of nighttime Los Angeles and the seedy side of Los Angeles very well in the film. I thought it was a superb film, actually. I thought whether I'd call it enjoyable so much as interesting is probably more to the point. It's interesting, it's well made, it's got a great central performance, but a good supporting cast as well. It's got some very sort of salient points to make about modern life. And the nature of modern media, particularly. It's funny in places, it's exciting in places, and it's just interesting. It's nice to see a film. It's one of those films where you can say the lead character, you don't like the lead character, but you're still interested in watching what he does, and you're still invested in the movie. And I thought it was a very good film, one of the better films I've seen this year, in fact, and I give it 8 out of 10.
Solid.
Word.
Well, it's good to see. I don't know. I like the idea. I mean, obviously, I've got as much chance of going to the cinema as I do, being picked for the next Olympic athletics team. But I like the idea of Gyllenhaal actually, embracing the fact that on occasions he's just weird and actually playing against, some of his type and actually doing something a bit more, off, a bit more unconventional. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen. There's a French electronic band called The Shoes, and that's what they're called. Just live with it. And he features in one of their videos for a track called "Time to Dance," and he does a sort of Christian Bale-esque psychotic turn. He just runs around hipsters. It's actually a very good video.
I'm going to watch that as soon as we finish recording this.
Genuinely creepy at times in it. So it's good to see him embracing that.
He is genuinely unnerving in this film and very, very creepy. and it works brilliantly in terms of the character. You'll after you leave the cinema, you'll be able to forget his staring, burning eyes. And it's interesting. It's not when he loses his temper or he rants and raves in the film that he's frightening. It's when he's completely controlled and brutally honest. And it's I thought it was a really, really powerful film. And I would not be surprised if Gyllenhaal doesn't get an Oscar nod for this, because he really is that good in it.
Good stuff. Right, so let's move on to Blu-rays released next week, Steve.
Next week, it's the X-Men Days of Futures Past, which is Bryan Singer's return to the X-Men fold, with a sequel that basically tries to combine the first-class X-Men and the original X-Men from the movies in the mid to late 90s, and joins them together basically in a film that involves a time travel plot, so you can get both sets of actors involved, plus also to a large extent rewrite and ignore the third X-Men movie, X-Men Last Stand, and is largely successful. I saw it at the cinema. I enjoyed it. As is often the case with these films, it's very heavy on Hugh Jackman and Wolverine, but it's well sort of choreographed and orchestrated by Bryan Singer. He certainly, I think X-Men 2 is one of the best superhero movies made, and he did a great job there. And here again, he does a pretty good job of basically trying to tie up an awful lot of loose ends and continuity errors that have been created by the previous X-Men movies. He's got a great cast to work with. The effects are excellent, and the plot's pretty good, and I enjoyed it, and it largely works. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is very good and worth seeing if you haven't seen it. It was shot natively in 3D, so if you can watch 3D movies, or you've got 3D TV or projector, then I'd recommend getting a 3D disc rather than the 2D disc, because it's worth buying. Good movie, very good movie. And the other film coming out is Jersey Boys, which is Clint Eastwood's film version of the musical stage play. And I saw that at the cinema in the summer and enjoyed it to a degree. It's about Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, and unfortunately, I think clearly Eastwood was more interested in the story of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons in terms of their relationship with the mob and that kind of thing, and less interested in the actual music. So I think anyone who's probably going to see it, having seen the stage play, the musical, will be disappointed, because it doesn't really play as a sort of full-on musical. It's much more of a film about a band, and therefore the music is within the context of the film. It's them on stage or them in the recording studio. And it's also full of quite a lot of strong language. So I don't know whether that'll play well with some of the people that might be coming from the theatre. But I mean, it's not, I don't think it's complete. I think I would have liked to have seen either a proper full-on musical or a more of a serious movie about Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons in terms of their relationship with the mob. But if you like the musical and you like the band, you probably enjoy it. It was okay. The cast are pretty good.
Cool. So that's a Blu-rays released next week. Still no Theodore Rex. This has been like 62 episodes now and still not coming out in Blu-ray.
No,
Yes.
And by the way, I think we mentioned it 3 weeks ago, but I'm still waiting for my copy of With Now and I as well, which was supposed to come out ages ago. My box set.
Are you saying Theodore Rex and With Neil and I are in parity here?
No, not really.
Well, no, because you haven't seen Theodore Rex. You have no idea what lies in store. Makes it much more exciting.
Wait for 4K. No point cannibalising their own sales.
Yeah, that dinosaur suit's going to really hold up, isn't it?
Right, so to wrap up, we were talking about, vinyl. Should we go back to vinyl? Is there really a market for that? And obviously, when we're talking about film, especially the cinema, we've moved into the digital age of digital projectors and so on. But it seems to be, Steve, that certainly for filmmakers, you're looking at the likes of Episode 7 Star Wars, you're looking at the likes of the one that we're talking about earlier on, Interstellar, 70mm, 35mm still being used, IMAX still being used, a lot of film in there. Are we seeing, certainly with filmmakers, are we seeing them go back to film now? Are we seeing?
There's definitely a trend. Certainly, it's a trend that's been largely orchestrated and championed by Christopher Nolan, who is a self-confessed fan of 35mm. And in fact, he quite recently, Phil, you'd have seen this. I think it was Kodak. We're going to stop making 35mm film stock.
Yep.
And Nolan, along with some of the studios and other directors, got together, Scorsese and among them, to basically say, convince them to not do that, to keep making 35mm film stock so they could still use it for film production. So we were getting very close to the point where film was going to completely die out as a capture medium. Thankfully, it hasn't. So Christopher Nolan still uses 35mm, shoots on 35mm, and shoots on IMAX 70mm, basically. He's also, in the same way, he's kind of influenced J.J. Abrams, who shot on 35mm for, say, Star Trek Into Darkness, and shot some IMAX sequences, and he's doing exactly the same thing again for Star Wars Episode 7. He's shooting on 35mm, which is really good news, I think. Wally Pfister, who was obviously Christopher Nolan's DP before he made Transcendence. Transcendence is also shot on 35mm, and Michael Bay, I'm not going to say the best advocate of filmmaking, but he also has been using 35mm and shooting IMAX sequences. So there's definitely a trend for moving back to film stock. And no, that's different from projection necessarily. Where I think, no question in my mind, digital projection is a great thing, because I can remember the days when you'd get a crappy 35mm print that's been around in America 5 times before it got to England, and it was scratched and filthy and awful. Now you go to the cinema, every time you see the film, it's a pristine digital projection, and so you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. But there's a lot to be said for capturing, the images on 35mm, because it is a very different look to digital. I mean, they spend most of their time now trying to make digital look like film, because film has that very unique look to it. And it's interesting that efforts to do something that's not film-like, so for example, higher frame rate with The Hobbit, that was a big hoo-ha when the first Hobbit film came out. Yep. The last Hobbit film's coming out in a month's time, or a month and a half, and I don't think anyone's talking about HFR now.
So that's 3 years that it's been possible to shoot in HFR, and for cinemas to show stuff back at higher frame rate, and only the Hobbit films exist. That says everything you need to know.
Yeah, and obviously they were all shot back to back 3 years ago anyway, so no one has touched it since. And in fact, even the Hobbit films, they're not making a big deal about last year. Certainly when the Desolation of Smaug came out, you could go and see it in HFR, but you had to really look for it. Basically, most cinemas were not showing in HFR; they were showing it in normal 3D, 24 frames a second. And X-Men: Days of Futures Past was apparently shot at actually shot at 48 frames a second. But when that news broke, Fox went out of their way to say yes, but it's not being released that way. So clearly the studios, the massive backlash that The Hobbit got, quite deservedly, I think, because it looked fucking awful, has basically, I think, scared off a lot of filmmakers. I think most filmmakers don't want to do it anyway. I think no, they like the look of film, but the studios also didn't want to incur that kind of backlash either. So hopefully that's the last we'll see of that for some time. Although Cameron is talking about shooting Avatar 2, 3 and 4 at a higher frame rate, isn't he?
Well, he's talking about it, but it is interesting that if you look at film fans and the film enthusiasts and basically the film industry, they want to stay at 24 frames a second. They don't want higher frame rate. Then you look at the games industry, and I think the biggest thing at the minute, Mark, with games is that everybody wants higher frame rate.
People want a higher frame rate. People want a stable frame rate more than anything, I think. But that's because it's an interactive medium. People kind of, particularly with fighting games, you want to be able to feel like you're reacting within a split second. With a passive medium like film, that shouldn't really matter at all. Then that's all about kind of the aesthetics of it.
Yeah, totally. And I just wanted to make that point clear, because I know a lot of people get the two mixed up. So Steve, is there a future for film, do you think, or is it just going to be used as a capture, or is there money to be made in certain cinemas holding on to and preserving their 70mm projectors and so on for the occasional big film like Interstellar, which could be struck, a print could be struck and shown?
Well, there's certainly, there aren't that many cinemas, I think, that have 70mm projectors left, unfortunately. If you've ever had the opportunity to see 70mm, it is stunning. I mean, films that were shot on 75mm. I think The Master, Paul Thomas Anderson's last film, was shot in 70mm. That was the first film since Kenneth Branagh made Hamlet in 70mm about 15 years ago. So it's not used very often. But IMAX effectively is the same thing. It's a very large film format.
No, that's proper IMAX. Let's make that very clear. Yeah.
We need to differentiate between films that are shot digitally and then projected in an IMAX screen and films that are actually shot in IMAX. So when we're talking about Interstellar or Star Trek or Star Wars or The Dark Knight, there were sequences in those films that were shot with IMAX cameras using large film format. And yeah, if you can get to see those projected that way, it is quite, genuinely immersive. I mean, the screen is high and what fills your entire field of view. And the idea being that you watch the film and then these sequences will come in and they will completely immerse you in the film. I mean, I find that approach a little bit gimmicky myself. Going from one aspect ratio to another for certain sequences, it seems a bit gimmicky. Although it worked very effectively in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol when he's hanging on the outside of the Burj Khalifa. I mean, it gave you a genuine sense of vertigo because you was filling your entire field of view. But I think there's still room for digital capture. Sorry, not digital. Still room for 35mm capture. I think less so for 35mm or 70mm projection, unfortunately. But ultimately, I mean, it's a losing battle, isn't it? I think that ultimately we will end up in an all-digital world eventually. I mean, we're only talking about a few filmmakers here that are sort of fighting a rearguard action. Nolan, Spielberg still shoots on film, but Tarantino still shoots. Actually, Tarantino announced his next film, The Hateful Eight, will be shot in 70mm. So there you go. He's actually shooting the whole film in 70mm, which is very unusual. But I think those are sort of people just trying to be different, and the majority of filmmakers now, for cost reasons as much as anything else, are shooting digital. Although it's still surprised. I mean, I was surprised when I was interviewing the director of photography of Captain Phillips that film was shot entirely on film. It was shot on 35mm, and the sequences on the boats when they were attacking the ship, the pirates, that was shot on 16mm. So there's still people out there using film, and that's good news as far as I'm concerned. But I suspect ultimately, it's only a matter of time, isn't it?
Yeah, it has to be. Ed?
It's one that I confess I don't know enough about cinema projection to know this outright, and I'll be interested in feedback on this. Surely, if the effect of shooting on film can be largely effectively reproduced by then replaying it in cinemas digitally, obviously I appreciate the nostalgia, and I appreciate that 70mm is a different game again. But if you can get most of the effect by shooting on film and then replaying it through the normal channels, then it's easier to ensure that degree of survivability than it is to try and stay on film from start to finish, which, as Steve points out, is a much more challenging proposition, and
they would never do it.
And can be bloody awful as well.
Yeah, they would never do it. They will do, and I think we need to look at bodies like the BFI. And bodies like that in the US as well, where they will save, if a print exists, they will save that, and they may strike a print for a special screening. And I think that as film fans, that's the only hope that we have, I think, to ever see 70mm projected again. And like Steve says, it is just such an experience to see that. And it's a shame that digitally we can't do that anymore. You don't get the same effect. So you've got hope that bodies like the BFI will hang on to certainly some projectors and keep them in working order, like a lot of these societies keep Spitfires in working order so they can be flown again and that kind of thing. You would hope that is the case, and that every now and again we will get to see, or you can go to a special screening where you can go and see 70mm or even 35mm.
Well, it's worth remembering that when it comes to film preservation and long-term storage of film, it is done on film. It's not done. Even digital films will be scanned to 35mm.
Yeah, I mean
for whole preservation.
The whole thing there was that Toy Story. That was the perfect example, wasn't it? I mean, they had made that on a system using a file system that no longer existed, and they had to go back and try and unlock all these files, the original files for the Toy Story films, which were on formats that no longer existed. And that's the danger with digital.
Yeah, people don't use digital for long-term preservation and storage of films. It's much more sensible to use something physical like film that doesn't decay as long as it's stored correctly. Rather than a digital, a drive that might freeze, might break, might not be able to access it. You just don't know in the future. So I mean, and obviously we talk a lot about things like 4K, and we've mentioned in the past the possibility of 8K at some point in the future. Well, 8K, that is the same kind of resolution as 70mm. So, there is a chance that we will one day experience that kind of impact again with a, not film obviously, but with 8K capture. And then we could have 8K projection of old 70mm print, scanned at 8K, which is what they do. So things like Lawrence of Arabia, that was scanned at 8K when it was during its restoration. And so there is going to be an 8K print there available, maybe for one day for us to see in projection that way. And I'd love to see something like Lawrence of Arabia projected in its native, because it was shot on 65mm film. So, I did see it at the cinema actually when it had a reissue back in the mid to late 80s. I don't think it was 70mm, though. I think I saw it at 35mm print, but that was still a wonderful experience. But to see it in 65mm or 70mm, depending on look at it, would be a real experience.
Sort of on a wider level, doesn't it? This comes back to just how we're now looking for different things for different aspects of our media. I mean, let's face it, with sport, you want the highest resolution, fastest frame rate. You just want to go, to the eye-bleeding maximum of technology available at any given moment. But for a cinematic experience, that's not the same thing. So, whereas it always used to be that it was just automatically went with the notional highest spec best option available, it's now just choosing for given different purposes where you want to step off. I mean, in the same way that certain TV series, I don't necessarily think that they'd benefit from being shot like The Hobbit any more than The Hobbit did.
No, I mean, I think if you look at the history of cinema, it's often been other factors that have driven it. So the whole move to widescreen and stereo sound and surround sound was driven by TV's popularity. They were trying to do things in the cinema that you just couldn't do on a little television screen in your lounge. And I think that's what's happening to a certain extent now. Home cinema and TV, has moved to a point where you're getting, larger screen sizes, higher resolution, 3D, surround sound systems in the home. So in the cinema, you're trying to compete with that. You need to make the bigger experience. So, you're talking 70mm, IMAX, 3D, Dolby Atmos, Aura, whatever it is. It's trying to make the cinema more of an event again to compete with, home entertainment competition. And I guess, I'm all for making going to the cinema more of an event because I'm a film fan and I love the whole idea of projection and cinema and big screens. That's why I'm quite looking forward to seeing Interstellar. For one reason, is because I think that what Christopher Nolan is trying to do here is create an event movie, a real big experience. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen that much these days. And so, I applaud him for at least trying. Even if he doesn't succeed, at least he's trying.
Well, Steve, I think it's time to go and have a scone and some lighter fluid. And I think that's about it for the AVForums podcast this week. If you've got any thoughts on the way the film industry is going, certain filmmakers staying with film or the whole industry going digital, leave them in the podcast forum underneath this podcast. Likewise, remember the competitions are there to win, and I need to thank Steve Withers.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
Mark Botwright.
I haven't had real butter since I was a little girl.
And Ed Selley.
Alone, a symbol is meaningless, but with enough people, blowing up a building can change the world.
Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookmark avforums.com for latest reviews, news and video. And you can also leave us a rating on iTunes. I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.